Good afternoon, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and today I'm actually going to try and film a tag, and I'm even going to try and post it on Tag Tuesday. There's one Tuesday left in November, so I just need to get it up and get it done. So this is the nonfiction journey tag. So I am doing it in honour of Nonfiction November, which is a month-long read-along of reading nonfiction hosted by Olive at Book Olive for the last time this year. But I think everyone's going to keep reading nonfiction in November because that's just what we do now here on Booktube. And then the nonfiction journey tag was created by Hannah at Hannah's Books last year, and it was inspired by the Shakespeare journey tag and the Victorian literature journey tag. So all of these tags are about sort of going back to our earliest experiences with this particular type of literature and seeing how our taste has developed, or how our experiences sort of have developed. I may have been tagged in this last year, I can't remember, but I know I was really intending to do it, and I know that I didn't get round to it. So this is me finally getting down to it. There is a new nonfiction November tag that has started this year, so I am not going to tag anyone just because I feel like a lot of people have moved on to the next thing and I'm just sort of lagging behind here. So without further ado, let me get into the questions. Question number one, what was your first experience reading non-fiction? So I was very, very lucky to grow up in a house where reading was very important and facts were very important. Fact and fiction was very important in my early childhood. So my first experience reading non-fiction that I remember was a picture book. I think it was a picture book for slightly older children, but still kind of picture book level, and it was called Amazing Schemes Within Your Genes, and it's by Dr. Fran Balkwill, I believe, and as it says on the tin, it's about genes, genetics, it's about sort of chromosomes and DNA double helixes and stuff, and how identical twins work and so on. So I have very clear memories of sort of even like the pictures and the illustrations in that book, and that's still kind of, every time somebody talks about chromosomes I get that kind of image, or if somebody says genes, there's just this little thing in the back of my head that says amazing schemes within your genes. So that book definitely had like a lingering impact in terms of me already kind of having some of the ideas of genetics that were not introduced until quite late on in school education. We also had a couple of books from the Magic School Bus series, and this is very definitely a fiction series. It's picture books, but it brings in a lot of facts. So in the one that I most remember, the Magic School Bus ends up going inside a person's body, and it drives around from organ to organ, and I remember learning about how white blood cells work because the Magic School Bus nearly gets digested by one, and you know, all of the kids are going to be eaten by this white blood cell. So yeah, I really liked how those stories sort of blended fact and fiction so that you got the benefits of the non-fiction but framed in a child-friendly way. Moving on from that then, we used to read sort of like the horrible histories, so again making history really entertaining and engaging, maybe not 100% accurate, but accurate enough for sort of like a chapter book reading, middle grade I suppose you would say now, child. And I also remember having just like child-friendly textbooks. I remember in particular one time my parents kind of pulling out a textbook that had like a anatomy of men and women, and using that to explain the differences between men and women when probably we were about like sort of 5 or 6. But yeah, just having access to all of those non-fiction stories was a definite feature of my early childhood and going forward. So chapter number 2. Question number 2 instead, has the reading of a work of non-fiction ever brought you to tears? Yes, many times. I increasingly, you know, the more I read non-fiction, the more I just happily cry at almost anything. Same with fiction, actually. The first non-fiction book that I can remember really getting to me and causing me to almost sob was by Adam Kay. This is not the book in question. This is I don't have the copy, but This Is Going to Hurt. If you've read the book, you probably know the part that I mean. It's right at the end of the book. It's his reason for leaving his career as a doctor, and it's a really very, very upsetting incident that happens with a patient of his. And yeah, that I read that on a night shift on my break. I was sobbing. Going back into work, it was quite hard. And yeah, a lot of my colleagues also read the book and could really sort of relate to it. It's interesting that I've read more non-fiction since then, including books like Give Birth Like a Feminist by Millie Hill, where actually it kind of makes me understand that how Adam Kay, the world of obstetrics and gynecology that Adam Kay was working in is often not very women-centred, and often actively sort of undermining the rights of women. That doesn't go against the upsetting nature of the end of his book, but it's interesting that he has less credibility in my eyes now that I have read other things that make me kind of question the premises of the ways that he talks about some of his patients, for instance. A more recent book that has brought me to tears, and a category of book I would say, is this one, War Diary by Yevgenia Belarusets, and as you might be able to tell from the yellow and blue on the cover, this is a diary of the first few months of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. I also have another one called You Don't Know What War Is. Should look up the author, I should have brought it down as well. Both of these books made me cry because of the situation. It's not necessarily the words of the author, but the knowledge of what they were going through and the setting that they were in, and some of the things that they said that I could kind of very vividly relate to. Brought me to tears. So yeah, I think a powerful work of nonfiction can be almost more effective at bringing you to tears than a work of fiction, because you know it's true. But it can go either way. Question number 3, are there any people who have played a significant role in your non-fiction journey? I would say yes, absolutely. So when I was in college, I studied literature. That's English college, not American college. So when I was sort of 17, 18, I had a fantastic literature teacher called Sean, and Sean taught us a variety of world literature, but one of the things that we did study was essays. I remember studying some essays by Andrew O'Hagan, and I think we sort of compared them to some essays by Orwell and potentially also Kipling, but I can't quite remember. What Sean taught me was something that I'd never really considered up to that point, was that non-fiction can be just as literary as fiction, and you can analyse it, use sort of the words used and the way that works are structured and the way that information is delivered. You can analyse that as much as you can analyse a work of fiction. Good non-fiction that's written critically and insightfully, there's a huge amount of value to really exploring that in detail. And before that, I think I'd always thought of non-fiction as being just like simple delivery of facts, and I hadn't kind of twigged the fact that delivery of facts can be done in a very specific way to invoke certain emotions and so on. Not that I hadn't done well in my English language GCSEs and stuff that talks about how language is used, but I just hadn't quite put the 2 and 2 together that non-fiction is also literature. So yeah, that was 17-year-old me. I needed Sean to kind of bring those things out for me. The next is not an individual person, but it's a place, a thing, and that is Booktube itself. Despite my very early experiences with non-fiction, and despite sort of Sean's influence at a later stage, I was never a reader of non-fiction. I was a reader of, the textbooks that I needed to read, and sort of occasional factual pieces, but I never really went to the non-fiction aisle, for instance, in the library. The one non-fiction aisle, a non-fiction section of the library, that wasn't really of interest to me. I was always drawn to fiction, and particularly like classics and so on. When I started on Booktube, gradually over time, the breadth of my reading dramatically increased, and the amount of non-fiction that I read has increased in tandem with that. And I'm really glad of that. I think it's a fantastic thing that the different aspects of the world have opened up to me, because I am now much more open to reading non-fiction. Booktube has played a major part in that. Question number 4, do you enjoy documentaries, and is there something that you'd like to see made into a documentary? Absolutely, I like documentaries. I don't watch an awful lot just because we don't have a television in my house. So if we're watching a documentary, it's one that we've chosen to watch. Being somebody from Britain of a certain age, documentary and Sir David Attenborough are just like wedded together in my mind. So the nature documentaries like Blue Planet and Planet Earth are sort of my favourite kind of documentary, and just his voice and the beautiful nature scenery and the message of looking after the world. I love those things. I love it. A documentary that I would like to see, it has already been made, I just haven't seen it yet, is called Wilding, and it is a film related to a book that I've just finished reading by Isabella Tree, and this book is about the rewilding, or the deregulation, the permission of allowing nature to do what it wants to do in the Knepp estate in Sussex. This is really close to my home, and for some reason I've never been there. And the book is fantastic because it's such a beautiful account of what happens when humans take a step back, they take their hands off, they have introduced sort of animals that are akin to the animals that would have been present in the landscape historically, and they're just sort of allowing that to develop and seeing what happens when these animals sort of roam around, disturbing the vegetation, enabling birds, butterflies, insects to possibly recover or colonise new areas. We don't know exactly what was there before humans were present, so that's why the rewilding is a little bit of a, like, how do we know if it's rewilding or if it's just wilding, hence the name. And after the book came out, it was made into a film, and I've seen the trailer, and I'm really, really hoping to watch that as well as actually visiting the place, because that book, I've only just finished it, but it was fantastic, and it has completely reshaped the way that I look at the countryside. So yeah, I would like to see that documentary. Question number 5, have you read a biography or a memoir and related to the person from that? I've just reworded that question slightly because I didn't write down word for word. Definitely the one that leaps to mind is Testament of Youth by Vera Brittain. So Vera Brittain was a young woman in 20th century Britain. In the First World War, she worked as a nurse. I think she was a VAD, Volunteer Auxiliary Department, I think. I happened to be reading this. I just picked it up at the start of the 2020 COVID pandemic. I was working in a hospital at that time, and although the context of our work and the kind of work that we were doing was very, very different, the feeling of being present at a historical moment and being required to play a part, however small and insignificant, in a huge event that will be like formative for your time. I saw a lot of her experiences reflected in the world that we were living in, and that time, the way that everything has suddenly been turned on its head, people are having to do things that they never expected to do. But this sense of common purpose as well, and yeah, like various different factors. And reading this, I think, gave me inspiration and solace at a time when things were very, very difficult, and helped me to see that, you know, like, humanity have overcome various cataclysmic situations before, at a time when it seemed like everything was going completely wrong. It was reassuring to say, actually, you know, other generations have had these massive formative experiences. Other generations have dealt with huge waves of death and destruction, and recovered and lived to tell the tale and write about it really very well. So I enjoyed The Testament of Youth by Vera Brittain, and I did feel that I could relate to her experiences. Question number 6 is to read aloud a short passage you love from a work of non-fiction. So I'm going to leave that and do it at the end, so that if you get to the end and you want to just skip ahead, you can cut it out. Question number 7 then, do any works of non-fiction intimidate you? Yes, definitely. And thinking about this question, 2 books immediately leapt to mind, and it's no coincidence that they're both really hefty works of history. So for ages now, I have been thinking that I should read The Scramble for Africa by Thomas Pakenham. This was recommended to me, I think, back when I was in college, because we didn't cover a lot of... we did some, to be fair, we did more world history than a lot of courses, but we didn't cover a lot about the whole continent of Africa. And around that time, I was told, well, if you want to know about the history of Africa, the first text to read is The Scramble for Africa, and it talks all about the colonial race to get control over that continent. So I got a copy, and I've had it ever since, and oh my god, it's so thick, and you know, it's just really, really hefty. The text is tiny, like really, really tiny, and I've never got around to it. And I think that since then, a lot more books relating to African history have been published. I read The Golden Rhinoceros last year, which talks about like the history of different parts of Africa through tries to put together a history of Africa away from sort of the European involvement. I would say it wasn't a particularly good history, I would say. There's a couple of others that have been published that might have a more African-centric perspective, although Africa itself obviously a massive place. So yeah, but less of a colonial perspective, I suppose, of the history of the continent. So there might be better alternatives now, but I still kind of feel like I should have read this. But I still kind of feel like I don't have the energy to do it. And the other one is another huge book, and that is Wild Swans, Three Daughters of China by Yung Chan. I've read over half of this book. Again, at college, we did do a lot of Chinese 20th century history as part of the course that I was doing, and we were recommended that this book kind of covered a lot of that history in a more personal way. I read most of it, I loved it, I thought it was fantastic, but I couldn't finish it because I was so busy with all of my studies at the time, and then I haven't been able to pick it back up again because I'd have to start again at the beginning, and it's so long, but it's so good. So I really need to try and just overcome that intimidation and get back to it and just finish that off. Question number 8 then is, what tips would you give to people hesitant to read non-fiction? And a tip that I quite often see given is to read something that's equivalent to a genre that you like in fiction. So if you like crime, read true crime. Or if you like adventures, read sort of the life of somebody who went on adventures. I would actually disagree with this because I have found that what I like in non-fiction is quite different from what I like in fiction. So I would say try reading differently. So I've read a lot more non-fiction as audiobooks. So a book like, say, Ancestors by Dr. Alice Roberts. I don't think I would ever have picked that up as a paper book because I would have thought, I like Dr. Alice Roberts, I like this kind of history, paleontology, that kind of stuff, but I'm not going to sit and get through a book that's all just about old bones. Not that I don't think it's interesting, but I wouldn't just want to sit down and read that in my free time. However, putting it on an audiobook, sticking it on while I was walking the dog, I really enjoyed that. I got a lot out of that book. So yeah, read differently. Another way to read differently, another book that I've really enjoyed is A Brief History of Black British Art. I read this this year for Framed in September, and it's just each page is a different artist. It's got one of their pictures, it's got a little bit about the artist and their works. And again, it's not a book that I would read at all like I would read a work of fiction in terms of like sitting down and racing through it and enjoying it. But I read it page by page. Each day I would stop and look at one of the pictures and kind of think about what that picture meant to me and read the description and flick back over sort of the previous pictures as well. And yeah, just like one at a time, just leaving it somewhere where I could read one each time. It's a completely different style of reading, but I love this, and I've got a lot of kind of art books done in a similar way where it's a picture and a little bit of text. Completely different from fiction, but it works for me and it gets me reading different kinds of non-fiction and learning about a topic that I wouldn't otherwise have learned about. I'd also say follow your interests, not necessarily your book tastes, but your interests. So I have a general interest in sort of nature, I guess, which is a very, very broad category. So does my husband, and we recommend each other books in that kind of sphere. I've also kind of recently joined a non-fiction book group that is focused on various topics related to sort of farming and stuff, and because of that we've read a lot of fascinating books lately, including about sort of land rights. So the Book of Trespass by I'm going to say Nick Hayes, that's a book that I never would have read otherwise, and it wouldn't relate to any fiction books that I read, but I really enjoyed it because it fitted with an interest that I have in terms of going out on walks in our local environment, and kind of understanding what land rights we do and don't have. Also, all of us are interested in, if we're on Booktube, we're interested in books. So books about books. I never would have thought that a book like Blurb Your Enthusiasm by Louise Wilder, or Wilder, I really enjoyed this. And it just talks about like the what goes into the copy on the front and back of a book. And that's not something that I would have picked up if I'd been thinking about what fiction I like, but I know that I'm interested in books, so that works in that sense. Next question then, favourite works of non-fiction. I always struggle with favourites questions, just because I just don't like to commit myself to saying that something or another thing is a favourite of mine. I would say almost all of the books that I've mentioned so far in this video, I've loved and I have been kind of on the favourite kind of level. I was kind of looking through my shelves and trying to think of something. I definitely would say I love some of the works of Orwell. I know as a person he maybe wasn't a great character, but some of his books like Down and Out in Paris and London, I've really, really enjoyed. His writing is just fantastic, even if he wasn't, you know, a great guy all round. Ben Goldacre, Bad Farmer. Holding this the wrong way around. Bad Farmer. Stiff by Mary Roach. One thing that I noticed when I was picking out all of these books is that I prefer, in non-fiction, books that approach their subject with a strong sense of humour. And again, that's a difference in reading fiction, because I don't really read funny books. I don't mind funny books, and I like things like Dickens that have a bit of a sense of humour in them, but I wouldn't pick books for humour. But in non-fiction, if the author has got a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of style that takes you through the kind of like, I mean, Bad Farmer's got some quite dense stuff in it. It's quite outdated now, it's quite old, but I think a lot of what he says still applies. Bringing like a kind of a bit of a wry, cynical sense of humour to that really helps you to get through the text and to absorb it and get on the author's side, I suppose. So I would say that a lot of my non-fiction favourites include humour. But aren't books about humour, but just include humour in their writing style. So now it's at the end of the video, and I did say I was going to read an extract. I was planning to read an extract from Virginia Woolf, A Room of One's Own, but my voice is now really tired, and I feel like this video is fairly long already. So I was going to read a lot, but I'll just read a short paragraph. I told you in the course of this paper that Shakespeare had a sister, but do not look for her in Sir Sidney Lee's Life of the Poet. She died young. Alas, she never wrote a word. She lies buried where the omnibuses now stop, opposite the Elephant and Castle. Now, my belief is that this poet, who never wrote a word and was buried at the crossroads, still lives. She lives in you and me and many other women who are not here tonight, for they are washing up the dishes and putting the children to bed. But she lives, for great poets do not die. They are a continuing presence. They need only the opportunity to walk among us in the flesh. This opportunity, as I think, it is now coming within your power to give her. And she goes on to talk about how if we live on for further centuries, as in collective life continues, the ability of women to have a room of their own, have a space of their own, and to contribute to sort of the literary sphere will increase. And I think if she was alive today, she would be able to see how much progress has been made on that front, but also how much progress is sort of left to go based on her predictions. So interesting for me. I'm not going to tag anyone, as I said, because I'm very late getting to this, but I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts on non-fiction. If you want to tell me any of your answers to any of the questions below, any non-fiction favourites that you think I might enjoy based on what I've said in this, then please do share. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.